Well, what's going on, everybody? I wanted to kind of film a recap video of the past couple of months and kind of chop up a couple of months into a hopefully a short video, but you never know. Sometimes I babble and time gets away from me. But I wanted to kind of put into a recap of what the last couple of months has been like and stuff like that, and give you guys something to look at as well. So back in August of this year, I scheduled the CCIE Service Provider Lab exam in Richardson, Texas, on November 8th. I passed the written exam in July, so I think I waited like 3 weeks to let's go to the lab just because, I don't know, I was just busy with work and family stuff, and I didn't want to. The moment you plunk down $1,600 for any test, that pretty much, commits you to that exam. And I wasn't really ready to do that. My wife actually came into my office. She said, "Have you booked your lab yet?" And I go, "No, not yet." And she's like, "Go to the website, find a date, book it." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So she basically made me do it, which I'm not mad at her for doing it. It had to be done. So I spent. I was kind of dumb, I'll be honest with you. I was kind of an idiot in the way I approached it. I felt like I had done enough prep to where I could walk into the lab and I got this. I already have a CCIE. That was a really bad mistake. So basically, what ended up happening is September came and went, October came and went, and I was within the last couple weeks of my preparation. So we're talking last week of October, the first week of November, within the last 2 weeks. It was like, okay, have I done enough? And so I was trying to read forums and try to get like, okay, what have people seen? And I really wasn't getting a whole lot. And it kind of frustrated me because it was like, this exam is really hard and I'm not sure exactly what I'm walking into because I'd never seen the lab. So the nervousness and unknown of having never seen the exam was starting to take its effect. I was getting grumpy, and it wasn't my family's fault. It was my own because I was, I was stressed out about the test, and I wasn't trying to it's not like I was trying to hide it, but it was like I didn't really feel like it's like how do you get frustrated or stressed out about something you've never seen? So it's the unknown that was taking its effect. But anyway, and you just have to deal with that. And I don't really have a good way of dealing with it. You just have to understand people that are around you that have been through the process with you before. They have to understand that you're under a lot of stress because of the exam. There was also some other work-related stuff where, there was a lot of stuff that was coming up last minute, and I was trying to spend as much time as I could preparing for the lab, and stuff like that. But I'll be honest with you, if I would have spent 14 hours a day from the date that I booked the lab until November 6th, which was the last day I could really do anything, I still wouldn't have passed. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how I came to that conclusion and stuff like that. But so September and October passed by. I did go in and play around with some other things just to disconnect a little bit and stuff like that. But I had studied a lot. I knew how to configure the majority of things on the blueprint, or so I thought. So when we flew down to Richardson, Texas on the 7th, and my wife and I, she fortunately was able to get off of work for those couple days. So normally what we'll do is we have family in town that lives pretty close by, so they'll keep an eye on the kids, and my kids are older, so they can kind of take care of themselves. My oldest son will normally keep an eye on his younger brother, and he's really good about being a mother. Keeps tabs on him. He's kind of I won't say a goody two shoes, but because he's not, he's really responsible for his age. And so we recognize that. We give him the responsibility of keeping an eye on his brother and give him an authority and say, okay, if your brother starts acting up, you can punish your brother. But this is how we want you to punish your brother. We kind of coach him on how to handle something instead of, and he's really even-tempered, really mild-mannered. So I was very fortunate with my kids. I didn't have any. My kids really didn't cause me any trouble. And it's also beneficial too that they're older, so I don't have an 18-month-old or a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old that are constantly pulling for my attention while I'm trying to study for a CCIE. I don't have that pressure. My kids were older when I started studying for it, so they kind of knew what was going on. But I'd still would spend an adequate amount of time with them. But my wife and I flew down to Richardson, and then when we got to we landed in Richardson. We got our rental car because I do not trust the hotel shuttle. I had I wouldn't say a bad experience, but a less than pleasant experience in RTP on my third attempt at route switch back in 2015. I was there with a friend of mine who was taking the lab for his first attempt. It was my third, and so when we flew down, he got there a day or two earlier than I did, but the shuttle from the hotel to Cisco's location in RTP, the shuttle driver could have cared less about getting us to Cisco. He was more concerned about getting the other people that needed the shuttle to the airport. And so we kept on looking at the time, and finally we both opened up our mouths and said, man, we've got to get to Cisco. We have a test. I was like, it's cost us both a lot of money. We need to get there. And so he was about to make a right because it was going to be our second or third trip to the airport. But he was just like, okay, fine. And so he made the left-hand turn to go down towards Cisco because at that point we knew if you're going right, you're going to the airport. If you're going left, you're going to Cisco. Because I'd been there enough times to know that. So because of that, I never wanted to have the oh crap, am I going to be able to get there on time? Because RTP started at like 7 o'clock in the morning. Richardson, it's later. So we rented a car. I like to be in control of as many things as I can. Having a rental car is one of them. So I went ahead and we rented a car. We drove to the hotel, which was about 7-8 minutes from Cisco's location based off of GPS and so our research. So we got to the hotel, we got checked in, settled down, and then it was like, okay, my wife was like, okay, what do you want to do now? And so she was there to support me in this particular case and try to make my life a little bit easier. And so we got in the car. There are a lot of toll roads in Richardson. I was actually surprised. So I set my GPS to avoid tolls. So we went and we drove from the hotel and we took a path to the Cisco location. So we already knew what roads to be on, so it was, I wouldn't say a familiar path, but we'd already been on the path a couple of times by that point. So the next day when I went to go sit for the lab, there was no, okay, what road do I have to take on? Are you sure it's this one? So we wanted to eliminate as much stress as we could. So we did. So we drove to the location, we drove around the campus, I found building 5, and I go, okay, that's where I have to go tomorrow. So I knew people were taking the lab. I just didn't know where inside the building the lab was actually there. So we ended up driving back. We got some food. We went back to the hotel room, and it was more or less just relax. I did a little bit of a light review. Read through some documentation briefly and some stuff that I hadn't studied in a while. Mainly the platforms I didn't have a lot of experience on, like the ME3400. In case they ask me questions on like UNI ports and NNI ports and things like that, and the ASR 9K with, dealing with the RPs and some stuff that I've never been able to test out. So we did all that, and before you know it, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night rolls around, and I'm already starting to doze off, which is a great sign for me, because the night before I'd only gotten a few hours of rest. I did that on purpose so that I would be tired the night before the lab, which was so Wednesday into Thursday. I only got, I think, like 4 hours of sleep. We flew down to Richardson on the 7th, which was a Thursday, and then when we got into Richardson we were in the hotel room watching TV, and eventually like 10 o'clock rolled around and TV was off. We were both, I was out cold. I was falling asleep. So the next morning, 6:45, my alarm went off. I've been kind of tossing and turning since about 5. So I was rested, and that was a really big thing for me. Is I know going into a lab exam, you want to be as mentally ready for it as you can, meaning that you're not tired. If you're stressed out about the test and things like that, I understand. I've been there. I know exactly what you're going through. I know some people that haven't gotten to CCIE yet that are they're stressing out about it. I know exactly what that stress feels like because I've been there for two different tracks. But I think the big differentiator between having a CCIE and going for having a CCIE and going for a second track, and then not having a CCIE and trying to get your first number, you're getting your first track under your belt and getting your number. There's a big difference between those two, and I can say that not already having a CCIE, going in for a second track, going for service provider instead of routing and switching. That hunger, that like, oh my god, I have to pass this, and putting that extra level of effort, that wasn't there this time, and it's because I already have a CCIE. So to me, that pressure wasn't there, which for me that made it easier to approach the exam versus someone that doesn't have a CCIE that does approach the exam. So I've seen both sides. But regardless of how you approach it, you should still try to maintain that, like, I've got to get this done. So we drove to the testing center that morning, and then we got to the location. My wife dropped me off. I gave her as much of my stuff as I could because I didn't want to go into the room or go into the testing center with a whole bunch of stuff like I normally did. And got in there, got checked in. There was a receptionist there. She got us checked in. So she checks your license, and they give you a sheet of paper with menu items. I think there was like 6 or 7 things on there. You check off what you want, and then you can check off what you want for to drink. So they try to be very cognizant of dietary needs. So I got the club sandwich, something that I would normally get at a restaurant for lunch. And then you get a name tag, and then you just wait around for the proctor. The proctor shows up around 8:15, 8:20, I think, something like that. And I think it was like 8:15. The proctor shows up. There was an Asian gentleman, and he came out, introduced himself as the proctor, and then he gathers everybody. There were 16 people taking the lab, including me. The last time I had seen a lab exam was in 2015, and I think there was like 8, maybe 9 people. The lab exam in Richardson, I think, holds more people, but don't quote me on that. It doesn't really matter because RTP's been shut down for a while now. But so we walked back, and the first stop we made was to point out the bathrooms, which was good because everybody needs to know where the bathroom's at. And then we rounded a corner, and there was like a break area with like a kitchenette built into it, and you could an island where you can sit up and talk, and there's also some seating areas like a cafeteria. And then past that, like 3 or 4 conference rooms on the right hand side is where the lab exam is. So I was actually surprised that the lab exam looked the way that it did, because I was used to RTP where you'd walk in, you'd have this room where it says CCIE Lab, and you'd walk in, you'd have these lockers, you put your stuff in the lockers, and then you would sit down, or you would have to go find out which pod you were going to sit at. You'd sit down at your pod, and you had these little partition walls. So it was like a mini cubicle that you'd sit at, and they were all in a row, and all the tracks were staggered. So you'd have route switch, then wireless, then route switch, then data center, then so on and so forth. And I think there was like 3 or 4 rows of folks to take the lab. 1 monitor back in RTP when I took it the last time. This time, you walk in, it was like being in a college classroom. If you've ever taken a college class, oftentimes there's going to be a computer on the desktop, and you're going to have 2 monitors, and there's going to be 2 people to a row. So there's 4 rows deep, 2 people at each setup. So that means that there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8, which gives you a total of 16 people. I talked to the proctor briefly after the lab was over with, and I said, "Wow, it's a packed room." And he looked over his shoulder at me and goes, "Yeah, we're packed every day." They're at capacity or near capacity every day because of the looming revision changes coming in February. So there was only one service provider rack, and I sat down at it, and I sat down, and he waited for everybody to get situated, and once everybody was good to go, there's a sheet of paper on your desk with your name, and there's a 9-digit code. You wiggle the mouse, you wake up the computer, and then there's a text box. You click inside it, you type in that 9-digit code, which automatically brings you into the testing center, and I should say the lab environment, and then he tells you to wait there. And so I read through the restrictions, what to do, what not to do, so on and so forth, and then you're off to the races. And so I was like, okay, no worries. And so I, it's begin lab, and as soon as you click begin lab, you're dropped into a large topology similar to what you see on your screen now, and you have a list of things at the top of questions and diagrams and stuff like that. So I started reading through the incidents and the tickets that I had to go create or go resolve, and out of the there's 11 tickets, and I started sitting down and reading through the tickets. I was like, okay, which ones can I knock out quickly? Let's grab a bunch of 2-pointers and just bang out some. It's 25 points for the tickets. So they have 11 tickets totaling 25 points. So it's a combination of 2 and 3 point values. And once that was, and your timer's in the upper right hand corner of your screen. So it starts at 2:30 and works its way down. Because you have 2-hour troubleshooting section with an optional 30-minute carryover from config into troubleshooting. I went down to 25 minutes. So I used like 5 minutes from config because I was stuck on this one thing, and I was looking at. Then at that point you're like, okay, every time you would resolve an issue, you would note down, okay, what ticket number it was and what the point value was, and you'd be like, okay, there was some trouble tickets in there that I was like, I haven't got the slightest clue how to solve this, no clue, and I was like, okay, so I resolved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tickets, 6 out of 11, I got resolved, and so I was feeling pretty good. And I looked down at my score sheet, and I was like, okay, I've earned 13 points. And I looked at the count up the total, and I needed 25. Well, 25 total was for that section. So I was like, and at that point in time, I'm at the hour and 45 minute mark, hour and 50 minute mark, I think. It took a few minutes just to total them all up. And at that point, right then and there, is the point that most people need to stop and take stock of where they're at. Am I going to pass or am I going to fail? Right then and there. Are you going to pass or you're going to fail? Because you need to pass all 3 sections of the lab exam and beyond the minimum score. So let's say, for instance, that in order to pass the troubleshooting section for service provider, you need 16 points, or you need 18 points, something along those lines. Or maybe you need 14 to get a minimum score. That's the minimum you need in order to pass. So let's say that's 60%. But you need more like 20 or 22 points, more closer to 80, 85, 90% in order to pass. So I knew right then and there I'm going to fail. But I was okay with that because the whole purpose of taking the CCIE lab exam, I mean, obviously it is to pass, but you also have to be cognizant of the fact that when you're in the exam and you're presented with 11 tickets and you really have no clue what the problems are because you've never seen the lab exam, it's okay to fail. And that's one thing that as I'm sitting there, I'm like, well, I'll be coming back a second time. I don't know when that'll be, but I'll be coming back a second time. And so I'm like, okay, that's okay. I was okay with it. And part of the reason why I was okay with it is because fail or pass on this attempt at the lab exam for service provider, I still get to walk out of here as CCIE. So I had that going for me. So diagnostic drops in. It's 10 issues. Some of them are rather complex to read through, and it's just a freak load of output. It's like, really, Cisco? really? It blows my mind the amount of garbage that they try to. It's information overload. So what you really need to be good at in terms of what's happening is you need to be able to understand what the problem is that they're having. If you don't know, at least this is my take on the situation. If you don't know what the problem is, or what the issue that resolves or revolves around the problem, within just a minute or two of you reading the initial, you have the initial ticket issue, where you get like a paragraph or two, maybe a couple sentences depending on the ticket, and then you read through the email thread. The email thread gives you some context around the problem, and you're like, okay, well, this or that, and you're like, okay, and then you need to be able to, based off of that information, you need to look at and go, okay, based off of what the problem is in the feature or technology that they're trying to implement, where would I go look? And so you need to be able to quickly be able to kind of skim over the config and be like, okay, what's going on? There were some buggy ones in there where it's I don't want to give anything away, but like if you're not really paying attention and you don't really understand how this particular technology gets implemented, then you'll be looking through it and going, okay. There was one where they had this particular ticket, had this particular feature that was not working. And I'm like, okay, why is this not working? And I'm thinking back, okay, what are the, say, 6 or 7 steps to get this particular feature to work? And so I'm like, okay, but this particular thing needs to match. This one particular feature needs to be, we'll go with feature. This one particular feature needs to be the same across all these nodes in order for these nodes to be able to work together in order to allow this particular feature to work. And I'm looking through it, and I'm like this, reading through, because not only is the text rather small, you have to be, you're looking for a detail. You're okay, let me look at this. Let me look at this router. Let's look at this config. Okay, let's look at this config. Oh, there it is right there. Okay. And then you're like trying to scoot to the very top of the screen, and you're like, okay, is that option? Okay, on this device here, it's this problem, it's this device, and it causes this particular thing does not match the other things. Done. Took me 10 minutes of going up and down, up and down, up and down until I finally found it. I'm like, really? That was one of the more complicated ones. There was another one where it was, and that was only 3 devices that were configured to support this particular feature. There was another one where there was 4, 6, 8, 10. I'm trying to visualize the ticket in my head. Yeah. 4. Yeah, there's 12. Or 10. Anyway, there were a number of devices involved in this configuration, and you had to go through and figure out, okay, how come this particular thing is not working for this particular sub setup? And I'm like, okay, so I'm starting to read through the config, and I'm like, all right, you're looking to make sure that this particular feature is enabled at the interface level, and that it's enabled globally, and that it's enabled, it's applied to the interface correctly. And I'm being vague on purpose. I don't want to give any of the diag questions away. But I'm looking through it, and I'm like, okay, let's look at the core now. And I'm like, okay, it's enabled at the interface level. Oh, they've got something turned on here that isn't turned on over here, so that's not going to match, so it's not going to work. So as soon as I started looking at it, it's like if you know how the technologies are supposed to be configured with different variations of it, because that's the whole point of CCIE, is to play with all the different variations you can put something into play. I went through all that, and I was like, oh, okay, that's different. So therefore, this is going to not allow that to work. So then I was like, okay, okay, these devices here, and this thing is turned on here, but not turned on here. So it was a lot of that. Those 2 specific tickets took me probably 25 minutes, which is almost half of my time in diag. And I was able to go through that and figure it out. I was able to get all 10 tickets. I read through them all, and you're able to go back and forth, right? But I did not try to change my answer. I'm not sure if you can. I just didn't try. So I was down to like 3 minutes left, I think 4 minutes left, and I had just finished the last ticket. So I sat back in my chair, which the chair was actually comfortable, and I'm looking around, and people are still, yeah, I can hear these people on the back just pounding away at their keyboards, and it was like a feverish pounding away, and I was like, okay, that's cool. And next thing you know, the timer stops, and your answers are then recorded, and then you are given this like summary page or dashboard. Okay, all these nodes are up and running, and I'm like, okay, that's a lot of devices. And next thing you know, you click on Begin Lab, and voila, you're dropped into to configuration. I'm pretty sure there was a Begin Lab. I think there was. Now that I remember, if I remember this correctly, I think there is a green button where you said Begin Lab, and you're dropped into it. And then they gave you this monster topology. Excuse me. And you have to go and, it's config. Now you have to go figure out, okay, where you're going to put different things in. And I had to be honest with you guys. There were some tasks in there. There were, if I count back, there were 6, 4, 4, 3, 3, 3. Yeah. So there were 6 in the first section, 4 in the second section, or 5. 2.4. So 6, 10, 13. So it's like 20 tasks altogether to configure in 5 hours. So I had just a little under 5 hours. And so I had literally just started config, and the proctor asked us to stop, get up, and we went to lunch. We went to lunch. I was able to talk back and forth with some people, and meet some people and stuff like that. That was cool. Find out who was taking what tracks, and how they were doing and stuff like that. And we had about 20 minutes to eat, which was a fair amount. I was able to get through all my lunch, and then it was good, but it definitely was not worth $1,600. I'll be honest. And then we went back, and then he put an end time of 4:46 when we came back from lunch, and it was off to the races. And there was a ton of config. And I found myself in the lab exam, like, I got through section 1 and section 2, most of section 3, section 4, most of section 5. There was only a handful of things I could not get working. And at that point here, I'm not trying to get everything working, because I knew I already failed from troubleshooting, but I was okay with that. So at that point in time, I'm squared away, and I'm just taking stock. Okay, at this point, the last hour or so, I'm looking through the config, and I'm like, okay. So I started totaling up all of my points, and I'm sitting in the mid 70s for point wise, assuming that I get everything correct. Big assumption. I should have, what are we at? Almost 30 minutes. I've got 73, 74 points. So I might actually be right on that cusp. And at that point, I was like, okay, I should be okay. And so at that point, I was like, all right, let's just kind of review what we're going through. And I ran into some problems early on in the lab, and trying to hurriedly get things configured, and things weren't working. And I was like, why is this not working? And I couldn't figure out why. And so I was just like, screw it, I'll come back to it later. I couldn't get something else working, because I'd only just lightly dabbled in it, so I wasn't really sure why it wasn't working. But one of the big things that I like to do as a takeaway is I like to take stock of what I wasn't working. So I'll be 100% transparent here with you. I got crushed, absolutely just decimated on multicast, QoS. Those are two big things that are on the blueprint, so I'm not giving anything away. And what was the other one? I've got my score results here. Let me go back to my dashboard and fail. I'll show you what I got. I'm not afraid to show this because I'm not showing anything proprietary. This is my lab results. So diagnostics, I met the minimum requirements. Configuration, fail. I got 50% in core routing. I got 36% in service provider architecture and services. I got 0% in access and aggregation, which I was actually a little surprised by this, but that's okay. I got 44% in high availability and convergence, and I got 38% in service provider security, operations, and management. I was like, okay, all right, that's fair. I know what I saw in these particular exams, so I know one or two of those things. I was like, yeah, I'm definitely not scoring any points because I couldn't get it working. But at the same point in time, I was a little surprised at some of the other stuff, and I'm like, okay. But when you come at it from the perspective, okay, I did not spend enough time in multicast. Simple as that. And a lot of the what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for? Like the peripheral topics. Where routing and switching, there really wasn't an emphasis on that, right? So I kind of came into it with the aspect of I don't really have to spend that much time in that. And I also had taken a look at, well, maybe I should listen to this instructor and not go through that because I'll have access to the documentation. I did use the documentation to get something up and running. I won't tell you what that was because on the screen, one of the screens that you're on, you can minimize the web page that you're on, and then you'll have a shortcut that says documentation. So you double click on the documentation, it pulls up a web page, and you have to know where to navigate. So I clicked on iOS XR and went through my version of code, and clicked on it BGP, and I was like, oh, here it is. Okay, that's right. I forgot how to configure that. Boom, done. So that's how I know I got some points because I was able to look at the documentation. It's an open book test. If you did not know that, it's an open book test. But open book exam or not, it's really freaking hard. So yeah, that's that. So I did fail, and that's okay. I'm okay with that because I realize in hindsight, or I'm sorry, I should say, is there a thing referred to as aftersight? Maybe I don't know. I know that